Back in 2015, Konami and Kojima Productions released Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, the latest and possibly last mainline entry in the series. The game prominently featured a female sniper named Quiet who was always dressed like this, and her character design received all the complaints you're imagining right now. When asked about it, Kojima actually had a lot to say, but the most relevant bit of it was this. Once you see how she fits into the story, you will understand why she looks the way she does. Without any of this background, I can certainly understand why there are concerns. I will say there's a reason she looks the way she does and wears those clothes, and it's all part of the game, learning those reasons one by one. And I thought, okay Kojima, fair enough. If there's an in-universe reason for her to be dressed this way, let's wait and see what it is, because maybe all the outrage is for nothing. So it turns out the reason, and slight spoilers for Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. The reason Quiet wears such revealing clothing is because she has an ability that lets her breathe through her skin, and if she wears too much clothing, she'll suffocate and die. She also has a handful of other very general and vaguely defined abilities you'd expect from a quasi-super soldier, like enhanced strength and better senses and the like. But the most important part is the bit about the breathing, which I'm sure contributes to her being such a great sniper, since not having to inhale and exhale like the rest of us would make it easier to aim a rifle. What we're intended to take away from this is the idea that Quiet needs to parade around nearly naked because it's just the price of her abilities, tying the utility of this character directly to her sexuality. But hey, we're told that if she covers up, she'll die, so we shouldn't even question it because that's just how the character is. And this is where we can start talking about My Hero Academia, because all of the justifications and excuses made for Quiet's character design seem to come back to this idea that it's okay because that's just the way her power works. Or in other words, because of the way her power works, they've got no choice but to dress her this way. This is the exact same thing people always say when discussing the various costumes worn by Momo Yaoyorozu, whether it be her standard hero costume, her medieval fantasy costume, or whatever Horikoshi decides to draw her wearing next. Momo's power is to generate usable objects from her body, thus creating a need for a lot of exposed skin, because how is she supposed to use her powers if her body is covered with clothing? The reason I can never, ever buy into this way of thinking is because it approaches the topic backwards. Her powers could have functioned in literally any way Horikoshi wanted them to. He chose this specific way, which suggests that the over-sexualization of Momo's character is the goal he was aiming for. Neither Momo nor Quiet feel like characters who need to wear over-sexualized outfits as the result of how their powers function, but rather their creators wanted to make over-sexualized female characters and gave them powers specifically tailored to justify that over-sexualization. Which feels especially out of place in the case of Momo, since Hiroaka draws so heavily from Horikoshi's love of Marvel and DC comics, which are filled with characters who use some sort of creation power to manifest useful objects, none of whom have the same weirdly sexual side effect to their power that Momo does. I think the real problem here comes from the fact that Horikoshi will base the designs of individual characters on specific eras and motifs of American superhero comics. And in the case of Momo, his references have just grown too outdated. There's seemingly no limit to the number of female superheroes from Marvel, DC, and other publishers that wear costumes that fall perfectly in line with Momo's. The thing that's not reflected in any of these designs is the fact that the times and the fandom have changed. More specifically, we now know that almost half the audience for superheroes is female. The San Diego Comic-Con is one of the largest gatherings of Western geek and nerd fandom in the world. These days it sees a turnout of about 130,000 people per year, and recent surveys put about 44% of attendees as female. That's around 57,000 women of all ages coming out to celebrate a hobby that we're all used to thinking of as a boys' club. That's on top of surveys finding that 39% of female respondents identify as fans of Marvel Comics, and Marvel's own vice president of sales and marketing saying that based on analytics from Disney, at least 40% of Marvel as a brand is being consumed by women. But at this point, there's no denying that nerd shit isn't a niche fandom anymore. Avengers Endgame grossing just under $3 billion is something that only happens if superheroes appeal to the widest audience possible. Which is why the old approach to character design feels like an antiquated relic. It's because the superhero genre used to be almost exclusively targeting males that we got character designs like these in the first place. Everyone assumed that only men would be looking at this material, so the female character designs were made to cater to men. Now that the audience for these characters is more diverse than ever, that diversity has to be reflected in the way the characters are presented. It can't just cater to male customers anymore because only a little over half of the customers are male. The result is a number of redesigns that mostly look pretty good. There are some bad ones, but for the most part they've managed to improve on the classic designs while also making functional outfits that make sense for the character. Many people will jump to point out that it's hypocritical to speak out against ultra-sexy female character designs but not take the same stance on male characters whose outfits show off just as much skin. And for the record, yeah, I think fewer superheroes in general should have idealized bodies regardless of their gender, especially when their powers have nothing to do with what kind of shape they're in. But let's not get hung up on a false equivalency here. The over-sexualization of female characters is not the same thing as the over-sexualization of their male counterparts, specifically because of who the main target audience for all of these characters was intended to be. Until relatively recently, before Marvel movies changed everything, the core demographic for most of the superhero content produced was adult men who read a ton of comics. Present that audience with an overly idealized male character, it's an escapist power fantasy. It's something they can project themselves onto and imagine themselves being. You don't just like Batman, you imagine how cool it would be to actually be Batman, going on adventures, driving the Batmobile, being filthy rich. Present that same audience with an overly idealized female character and it's not an escapist fantasy, it's a sexual fantasy. It's not someone you want to be, it's someone you want to be with. The primary reason for Catwoman to constantly wear outfits like these has nothing to do with her character. The whole literal cat burglar thing has always just been a superficial motif that made for a convenient excuse to dress her in hot outfits. Its function was to add to the fantasy of being Batman, because being Batman meant getting up close with Catwoman. Or, to bring it back to anime, you're supposed to want to be Kirito, and Asuna is supposed to be a perk of that fantasy. Kojima has gone on to say that a big part of his motivation for Quiet's design was to make her so sexy that her merchandise would fly off the shelves and that there'd be a lot of sexy Quiet cosplayers to enjoy. Horikoshi's use of Momo is nowhere near this level, but it still comes from the same place. It comes from the idea that to be of value, female characters have to be titillating to the male audience. Only now we have a ton of female heroes who are interesting, fleshed out people, and that clashes pretty harshly with the old mindset. We're constantly reminded that Momo is near the very top of her class, that she's incredibly intelligent and has the potential to grow into a good leader, but is held back by a lack of self-confidence, a quirk that lets her make anything she chooses, coupled with an inability to believe that she'll make the right choice. Momo Yaoyorozu is a good character. She has so much going on that's interesting, and every time she reaches a personal milestone, it feels like a moment of earned triumph. But all that feels undercut by the fact that she was visually designed to give the boys a good show. Hell, I'd even accept this design if the point of her character was for her outward appearance to be the exact opposite of who she really is, thus making her struggle with the way she's perceived by others when she only dresses that way because of her quirk. That would be fine. That would be great. That would be taking a tired, cliche way of approaching character design and using it for meaningful character building. But as it is, nothing about this character's personality or internal conflict is reflected in her design, and it's just an outdated trope. A lot of Horikoshi's designs pay tribute to different eras of American comics. But while characters like Stain and All Might feel like reactive nods to the art that influenced Horikoshi growing up, it's Momo Yaoyorozu that makes it feel like he's just stuck in the past.